I have to tell you, I was so fortunate meeting almost all the designers that are documented in this book, since Gregory Warszawski and the very pioneers that started the process in the 20s until the new generation that are that graduated from Brazilian design schools, and that is something that I cherish so much, because it was a struggle for us, not only in Brazil, but in the whole Latin America, to start education on design. This morning we had a great conversation on education that we needed to keep talking, and of course, Latin America has one great educator, Tomás Maldonado, that was the dean of Ulm School of Design, and is still alive among us and has incredible, a terrific role in design education. I'm very grateful to Gabriela, to my publisher, the graphic designer, and to Tatiana, and to my family, of course, being here, sharing with you the book. I don't have the images are here, and
what you have to say is that how many books do we have here? How do they?
Oh, that maybe Otávio can say, and Otávio can explain about administrative details of the book. And I promise maybe I come back and I prepare a very nice lecture about my book, because today it was not about the book, just to give you a taste, you know. But we can have a longer conversation about that. You could say how many books, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, I would like to say that this book was a very big pleasure making the second edition, mostly because it's a main reference book in Brazil. It has 20 years that the first edition came to the public, and it was almost a myth in this time, being sold very expensive in the
Black
market, in the second market, and we had this opportunity by Cecilia. We actualized, Cecilia actualized the book, and it's out there. We have some few pieces, like 20 or something like, but enough to present it to you, and
and I think it's very nice to share with you a gossip. Okay, this is about José Zanini Caldas. Actually, one picture that you showed, saying that is Venezuelan, is Brazilian, is by Zanini, José Zanini Caldas, the old guru of Brazilian design. Okay, the gossip is that I of course met José Zanini, the father of Zanini de Zanini, his young son. And Zanini, at that time when I was interviewing his father, he was about, let's say, 8 years old, 10 years old. And Zanini lived in Rio de Janeiro at that time. And every time I went to Rio, he invited me for dinner. Of course, he cooked not very well, but you know, the conversation was the real food, you know. And then Zanininho, his son, was there, and he was so quiet, and I was concerned how to engage this guy in our conversation, because you know Zanini, you know, he spoke a lot about Lina Bardi, about plywood. All the time he provided me with a great deal of information, but I was concerned with this little boy. And then I started the conversation with him saying, oh, where are you studying? What are you doing? And then he said finally he was in a French school, and I said, I found finally a subject to talk to him. And then I said, you know, I'm very bad in French verbs. I don't know, it's so difficult. And then he went to his room, you know, and brought a dictionary of verbs, and gave to me. And nowadays here, I had the great pleasure of writing about his work. He just got very important award in Paris last month from Paris Saloon. And it's great that I can keep talking to, not more about his father, about families of design. And also today, we have here Adriana Figueiredo. Please stand up, Adriana. She is the daughter of Bernardo Figueiredo, another great Brazilian architect and designer. And he designed many chairs. I have here in my book some of his work. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me talking about this very strong and beautiful side of Brazil. Thank you.
I would very, very much like to invite to the front to Miquel Adrià, which is he's my publisher, and he was really brave to publish this book that was, a very long process work. So he just arrived, and I really want you to come here. So
I saw in Mexico City this absolutely extraordinary exhibition Elena did on Van Beuren, and for me he was just a name. I was intrigued by him because I knew him in relationship to the Bauhaus and to the late Bauhaus, and then there was just this phenomenal exhibition, and I said how much I admired it, and to punish me for admiring it, she invited me to write the preface to her book, so, which was very dangerous. But it's a really wonderful production. It's really extraordinary research, and I think it's very nice to end this rich day talking about it for a minute, because I think it represents the type of work that a lot of people have been calling for all day long, that needs to look at all types of archives, not simply of how things are produced, but how they're marketed, how they're sold, and what their relationship is to a social, political, economic context at any given moment. And of course, Van Beuren he's a kind of somewhere between a war refugee and Woody Allen's Zelig. I mean, it just sort of starts to appear everywhere, and I think for a historian, everywhere he appears, and this is what's intriguing about the case and about the research in this book, which is thin but deep and beautiful. Thank you for producing it, because I think it's also very brave to take on a monograph on a mid-century designer, not terribly well known. People aren't going to flock to this, but there's an awful lot that is activated by this. So. This is supposed to be a conversation, so we should move more to a conversational mode. But I'd say that the frame of what really interested me is Van Beuren is at the Bauhaus at the very end. So Van Beuren is actually at a Bauhaus that does not correspond at all to the cliché of the Bauhaus, which is a Bauhaus that existed for approximately 12 months, around 1925, 1926. And so, of course, anyone who sees Bauhaus in Mexico is going to open it up, and they're going to think, what does this stuff have to do with Bauhaus? And it has a lot to do with the Bauhaus. It's an extraordinarily interesting conversation with the furniture design of the Bauhaus at the very end, which is a furniture design of wood, which is a furniture design that is interested in bent wood, in frames of wood, and in translating many of the short-lived tubular steel experiments of the mid-20s into a whole variety of other experiments. And key in that is the furniture design of Albers, who is another person who's going to have a very, very profound connection and love affair with Mexico, and a connection with Van Beuren. So that's both biographical, but it really goes to a very interesting moment in the Bauhaus that this work makes us remember. So I guess my first question, listening to you earlier this afternoon, was thinking, and you made the comment, Van Beuren was as much of an entrepreneur, kind of go-getter, a businessman. What would you say, sort of, in the early 40s in Mexico, before, that moment, things are still booming, we're not yet in the war, we don't know totally what's coming. Is Van Beuren trying to create a market or is he responding to his sense of a market? And I guess what really struck me is that everybody was referring today on the broadness of the chairs, and the broadness of the chairs are somewhere between the amplitude of the Mies Albers Bauhaus, which is no longer this existence minimum seat, that kind of expansiveness of the Barcelona chair, and then the expansiveness of Spanish colonial furniture and what you might find in Mexico, etc. So, what do you think? Is he creating or mirroring a market?
I think he's mirroring the market. I think he got, I mean, we were talking about intuition. He intuited the market because, I mean, really the 40s was the time that Mexico was changing. It started to industrialize actually in the 40s. No, the people really, after the revolution, the people moved from the country to the city, so they have like new needs. We had this, I always call it like this artisanal functionalism, because it was functional, but it was all made by hand. No, it had like the look of the industrial, like O'Gorman houses, but everything was made by hand. So it was just the look, not really the program as it was in Europe. No, so people were moving to that aesthetics, not really the program. No. And Van Beuren just got the sense, and it was no one around. I mean, in 47 you have like the other important company in Mexico, furniture company, was called Galerías Chippendale, and they sold Chippendale style and Queen Anne kind of furniture for like this nostalgic high class that really got stuck in the taste before the revolution. So I think he was not actually creating the market, but responding to the zeitgeist. No.
I think we're in a secret cell today. We're all going to go away having incredible new concepts like artisanal functionalism, which is fantastic. Following on cosmopolitan folklorism. I mean, this is, it happened here. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that is a very Latin American product, in the sense that, well, that it happens especially in architecture, that all the ideas that were thought in Europe, or the Bauhaus or so Le Corbusier ideas, were built in Latin America. Mm-hmm. And that in Mexico we found a lot of architects that were involved that way, like Mario Pani, like Enrique del Moral, that they built what in some way the Plan Voisin of Le Corbusier, La Ville Radieuse de Le Corbusier, finally were built there, or were built in Brazil too, and also in furniture. We have this effect that we could find also with Clara Porcet in some way. How to translate all these ideas with, let's say, this kind of industrial process that without industry, trying to simulate industrial process, but with very artisanal ways of building furniture. The same happened in architecture.
I was struck by, I'm working with my students right now, and then with the exhibition Patricio Del Real is involved with, and what we've been really thinking a lot about, can you bring the whole evolution of the ideology of developmentalism, and can you, and how might you actually see this in practice and inform? And one thing that occurred to me, and I'm wondering what you and others in the room might think about this, because a lot of the discussion of these furniture enterprises today has this notion of import substitution. And, a lot of it has to do with national market versus international market. And then so it's not only in Pat's terms that the date of the design is terribly important for the history of art, but the date is terribly important for what's actually happening in the possibilities of markets and movements. And with this growing ideology of import substitution. So putting artisanal functionalism into a developmentalist argument, I think would be
No,
incredibly
that's
interesting.
that's really interesting, and that sustitución de importaciones in Mexico even lasted until early the 80s. Because actually in the 70s we call it like the falling of the nopal the cactus curtain, because in the 70s, again, the president decided to close the country again and really try to improve and to push Mexican industry. And that was, I mean, early 70s. So we really have, like from the 40s, our developmentalism until early the 80s. So we were really a close nation, no? And really were aware only of the things we had inside. So that's interesting, because we got the trend and probably saw the magazines, and that happened in the 40s and later in the 70s as well. But we really didn't have the goods from outside. So it's interesting to think in the politics of design in that way. No?
A very interesting case, I think, is Venezuela, particularly in the 50s. And Cornelis Sidman, one of those designers that he's still alive, and I had also the chance to talk so many times with him. He was explaining to me, for example, that when they started the production in the early 50s, they were able to import certain components, particularly tools and the materials, the adhesives and the varnishes and things that were produced, these kind of plastics materials. And suddenly the government, put this high tariff on all those things to force national industries to produce those things. So they have to, in his case, he was kind of looking who will be able to produce these materials for me, because they were importing those from Sweden because it was cheaper than any other place. And Hans Neumann, an industrialist, our patron, very important in Venezuela in the 50s and 60s, had this painting company, so they were able to sample the original Swedish formula, trying to develop a formula that they improve over time. And thanks to those initial experiments, his company, Montana, became a very important chemical conglomerate in the.
And they were the sponsors for the design school that was formed in the 60s.
And they were the sponsor for the design
With
school.
Gego and these people, Leggett, Leufer, being part of the faculty.
And this is just one example of those policies that were repeated over and over, as you say, well into the 1980s. So it was kind of cyclical. They would kind of open the markets and let import things, or sometimes they have this a product needs to have this percentage of national components with some imported components, and this is since the 1940s. They were in different areas of the economy, like big plans on government level, like kind of open and closing the market, trying to create these autonomous nations, like a little bit like Mussolini's autarkic ideal Italy of the war. It's a kind of a cycle that we have seen everywhere in Latin America. That happened in Argentina, that happened in Mexico, in Brazil as well.
Yes.
And
In Brazil, it's very important to stress the role of the government of Rio de Janeiro state in the creation of the first school of design in Brazil. It was during the government of Carlos Lacerda that came the idea of creating a Escola Superior de Desenho Industrial, Superior School of Industrial Design, and it started, Rio de Janeiro at that time when the school started, it still was the capital of Brazil. And then we had the presence of Maldonado, of Max Bill, and other professors in ESD, and also Aloysio Magalhães and other, and the school started opened in 1962. And related to the role of the school in the production of furniture, it's very important to recall the experiment at the ED. ED was a laboratory for design at Museum of Modern Art, and there German designer Bert Miller started ergonomics project in order to measure the bodies of Brazilian young generation in order to design proper furniture for schools. That was an incredible project that developed across Brazil, providing better quality of life inside schools for our students. I think this is quite an issue that we could still, go deeper.
So if we go, I think I may have taken us up to the macro level, but if we try to come back down to the micro level of Van Beuren, a biographical thought I was thinking of, which is, to what extent does he, once he arrives in Mexico, and I have the sense, but you as his design biographer can correct me, that it's almost it almost just happens that he stays there. He's not planning to go to Mexico for the rest of his life. To what extent does he serve as some kind of north-south international connection or U.S.-Mexico connection continually? And to what extent does he go native and become
I think he has both.
Mexican immigrant?
Yes, I think he has like both parts, because as you were saying, he just went to Acapulco to do like this job, to create like 2 new bungalows at the Hotel Flamingos, and then he decided to stay. But he was supposed to be going back. He had an offer by Bertrand Goldberg to associate with him and live in Chicago. And he ended up deciding he got the sense of the market, I guess, and that he was a person that lived very much without rules. So Mexico was like the perfect paradise for that at the moment, no? So he really got to invent a lot of things. But what you can read in his letters, there's not much, and that's interesting, and I'll talk about that. The personal letters the family has in the archive, he talks about going to the States very much to buy like used machinery and bring back to Mexico and try to adapt it with like Mexican technology and informality, to create new machines to do what he wanted to do. So he went back and forward. Even when they opened in '47 the shop, he went to the States and brought pieces by Russell Wright and other American designers to sell at the shop. And there's even a chapter that is not very well documented. He participates with Bertrand Goldberg at the Golden Gate Fair in San Francisco with a few pieces of furniture. And then he's like the producer of Clara Porcet furniture when Clara Porcet tries to sell her butaques in California, and he was the one like doing like the perfect quality butaques. So he keeps going back and forward, but not really in the intellectual, artistic way, more in an entrepreneurial kind of way, going back and buying machinery. But he also ended up being a native. I was talking earlier about like the Van Beuren family opening this Mexican high-end restaurant and having these openings and people, and singers and artists doing performances there. So I think he acts in both ways. And at the end of his life, when he retires, after he sells the factory and he opens a new business on, how do you say, maderas conglomeradas, like conglomerate?
The composed wood.
Plywood, yeah, composed wood, that in Mexico was like the novelty. He opens, when he sells the factory, he opens a new factory doing like composed wood. After he retires, he decides to go to San Antonio and live like for 10 years in the States, just doing nothing, design a couple of things, and then he comes back to Cuernavaca. And so I think he was kind of an eslabón, but more in an entrepreneurial way, I think.
Here's another biographical question. I'm fascinated, and of course, the subtitle of the book is Bauhaus in Mexico. There are other Bauhaus figures in Mexico, notably Hannes Meyer, of course, at UNAM. But my question is not really on the network of Bauhaus people in Mexico City. That in itself is interesting. But to what extent do you think, of course, whenever we have somebody who was at the Bauhaus forever afterwards, their book is going to be called Bauhaus. Right? To what extent do you think Van Beuren thought of himself in Mexico is somehow related to the Bauhaus? Or is this just,
No, not
for
at
us,
all.
this
Yes.
is a kind of titre de noblesse?
No, and it was, no, it's something like that, and it has been like really polemic, because when the exhibitions opened in 2011, I mean, there was a huge queue of like young students really expecting to see Mia's work and Gropius, and then when they saw this like Mexican wood, you know, what is this? This is not Bauhaus, no? So it was the reaction to all the people, you know, and the book of comments saying, what the hell is this? This is not Bauhaus, no? And then, you know, the people said like when, also they see the book, this is Bauhaus, really? But at the end, I think it's a título de nobleza, as you said, but and he never thought himself as Bauhaus in Mexico, I think. But it was really interesting how the thought of the Bauhaus really got him to understood the context and to adapt like local systems and local materials. So what you can see in him is like the Bauhaus thought, no? And I think the same happened to Clara Porcet. Clara Porcet studied for a period of time, a small period of time, with Joseph Albers at Black Mountain College, but she really understood the thought and the way of, I mean, the design thinking of the Bauhaus, and they really got to adapt it to the Mexican conditions. So I don't really think he thought himself as a Bauhaus, you know, legacy guy. So.
And again, but I was surprised when we went to visit his archive that he kept every single notebook or paper related to his Bauhaus years in the archive, his personal archive, perfectly conserved everything that he had from those years in Germany. And I imagine someone that lived in Berlin in that period, you know, it was a difficult thing to be carry on all those materials. So those were important for him.
Yes, indeed they were, but I don't think he reviewed them that much. So he kept everything. What it's interesting is that, and I was going to say that about like the research, in Mexico we don't have a design museum or any design archives. Probably, Patricio, you know now that we have the archivo, the architect archive at UNAM, that it's really well kept and really, like, really pristinely done. But we have nothing on designers. So, I mean, this book, this very modest book on 99 pages, it's a 10-year work. Because, I mean, the family has the archive, but like in cardboard boxes, no? It's not like really cataloged or anything. So they didn't even, when I got there 8 years ago, they didn't even know what they have there. They say, look, oh, there's some cardboard on the cover if you want to go and see. And there was everything there. So Van Beuren kept everything, like from what he was seeing, the catalogs of like other vendors and the people he visited in the States, from his notebooks with Mies and all these like German drawings and Bauhaus drawings. So he kept everything. But I don't really think he thought very much about. He applied the thought and what he learned, and he cherished it very much. But I don't think he thought himself about that. But everything is there, and it was really difficult because it became a kind of a personal quest. You know, my husband keeps on saying I'm the widow of Van Beuren now because I spent like the last 10 years like pursuing everything. But it was like really hard.
You could have said a lot worse things about your relationship.
No, but it was really hard because it was there, and I had to go with the flow. if the son went through a divorce period, I couldn't go into the archive because the archive was off limits because of the fight between the wife and him. So it was really hard. And in terms of historicizing on design in Mexico, it's kind of like that. You see the Clara Porcet archive is at UNAM, but it's not even it doesn't have an inventory or its catalog. You do not know. Every time I go there, I find something new because nobody knows what it's there, no? At least now it's in a cover, no? It used to be on cardboard boxes, but...
What I find really interesting in the book is, say, that we tend to write history of architecture, but history of design as well, through the profile of designers. But Van Beuren opens this shop, and what would it look like to do a history of important design shops? And so, you know, of course, we also, the history of art always wants to push the Bauhaus towards an aesthetic movement, and it was never all that successful in its business strategy, but it was meant to be a business. We know this well because we looked into the issue of Bauhaus wallpapers at MoMA and the like, but the search for patents, the notion that actually a business sales model might be the model for financing the school. So, you know, and that right to the very end, even in the struggle with the National Socialists to close it, this was still a theme. So this is another thing that he takes from Bauhaus. Is much the idea that he would open up Domus. So the Domus is, you know, you could say is the Mexican Wohnbedarf, like Gideon's shop in Zurich. So, you know, another one of these places like. So Pat showing us the photo with the house in the garden, like the Museum of Modern Art design shop was, I think in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it's an incredibly important retail operation. So and I'm selling the book, by the way. Domus is as much the story of this book as Van Beuren. Yeah.
No, I think, thinking in terms of Bauhaus, he was a great and successful entrepreneur. Up to this day, like the third generation of Van Beuren family is living off what the factory did. So it was, I mean, if he got something from Bauhaus, was probably that.
And when did they start reissuing? Was that after your book, the reissues of the chairs?
They haven't yet.
Oh, I thought the one in the show.
No, the one in the show?
Yeah.
No. Well, after, yeah, well, that's kind of human interesting. No, the one in the show is vintage.
Oh, because it said 2012.
No, the one in the show is vintage.
The chaise.
The chaise, yes.
Oh, okay.
No, but what was interesting is when I got to the Van Beuren family, they were not, the widow one didn't want to talk to me, and the son, it took me a lot of time to track the son. But then, when after the show and when the book came out, the nietos, the grandsons, Van Beuren grandsons that never ever met him or were interested, decided, they live in Holland, they are musicians. So they decided they wanted to reissue the furniture and sell it in Holland. So they are doing it. They are doing like Miguelitos, and they are doing Miguelitos and the chaise, and they are doing a small production and selling it in Holland. So what was interesting is that the legacy of Van Beuren was not even interested to his grandsons, but now there's a new awareness, and there's even a company, like a big company in Mexico, that want to reissue the Van Beuren Linea Danesa. So we'll see.
Any other questions? I think we're almost, any other questions from the audience, since I'm not the logical person to be having this conversation?
No, I do really want to thank Barry, because he just not wrote the introduction to the book, but he read it all through, he made correction, he helped me with like the research, and I'm really, really, really grateful. And to Miquel, because it's, as Barry was saying, it's like really brave to publish a monography in a field such as new in Mexico as design history. Muchas gracias.